Okay.
Great. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking a portion of your day today to come to the Finance Committee meeting. So, let's jump right into it. And I think the first item on our agenda is to approve the meeting minutes from September 17th. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve them.
I'll second.
Motion by Kate, seconded by Bill. Any further discussion on the meeting minutes? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all that had a hand in preparing those. So moving along then, for our next item would be grant proposals, approvals, and updates from Emily, Jess, and others as needed. So we may have to come back to that since Emily and Jess aren't here. Or do you want to?
Emily is here.
Right. Okay.
Emily, are you ready to talk about Ag CWIP?
Yeah, I'm having some computer issues, so I don't have the documents that I shared in the email pulled up right now, but I'm on my phone right now, so I can talk. And
I
it looks
can
like
share my screen, Emily, if that's helpful.
Sure, that would be great.
Okay. Do you want just that chart that you sent
Yeah.
out? Okay.
Yep, that would be great. Thank you, Claire. And I can just dive in. So we have a little bit less than 1 year in the Ag CWIP agreement. It ends in end of June 2026. And this was a 4-year agreement, so fairly lengthy. We had a capacity building amendment that happened sort of directly through the agency, so we weren't particularly involved in that as council. And then we had another amendment that happened halfway through the agreement. And we collectively have been struggling to meet some of our deliverables. I think we're actually going to be pretty close. But some districts are doing more than they proposed, namely Franklin. Some districts are doing less. And so we just felt that there was a need for an overall shift of deliverables. So we offered another opportunity for districts to propose amendments to their agreement to ensure that they would be able to meet what they had proposed in the remaining year of the agreement. Several districts proposed changes without any budget. I'm going to back up for a second. We have talked to the agency about this. We haven't gotten into specifics with each district, and they want council to handle that. But they are generally aware and on board of these proposed changes. They are trying to avoid an amendment to the parent agreement if possible, and have said that if we're, fairly close to our deliverables, then they would just rather not amend it, and they'll consider those obligations met. However, they are doing some review to confirm, just to make sure that that's the case. So we're waiting on the final word on that. So some districts have not proposed any changes. Some districts have proposed changes to their deliverables. I would say most districts who had a proposal proposed a change to deliverables without a budget change. So in those cases, they have either reduced one deliverable and then increased another deliverable to sort of make up for that. Or in some cases, like Poultney Meadowy, they had just a really ambitious, I'll say, deliverable in the first place that didn't match with the scope was way beyond the scope of what other districts were doing with similar budgets. And so in some cases, when folks asked for just a reduction in deliverables, if it was putting them more in line with other districts with similar awards, then we felt comfortable just going ahead with that. So the two districts that need approval from the committee are Franklin, who is, they have already met or exceeded just about every deliverable, and they have proposed to do more, which is helpful in for those districts who are maybe a little bit low on some of their deliverables, not meeting all of their targets. If we can have another district kind of make up for that, then we're still meeting the obligations of our parent agreement. So that's what's going on with Franklin. And then maybe I'll pause there before we get into Lamoille, because I want to provide you guys with some more context around that. But I don't want to throw so much information at you all at once. So are there any questions, thoughts, concerns with what I've already said?
Yeah, Emily, I'm not, okay, I'm not quite following when you said that the agency doesn't want to amend. Are you saying that they would just sort of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, sort of informally accept the changes, or?
Yeah, so they, an amendment is not needed so long as we're still meeting our parent agreement. So
Okay,
they like to have an understanding of how those deliverables are distributed throughout the state. But if there is, you know, a shift from one district to another, for example, we are still meeting the overall. They're looking at the cumulative under our parent agreement. So we're still
Okay.
meeting those obligations.
that makes sense, yeah.
So that's their main concern. And they have said that they don't think, even with the changes cumulatively do change the picture slightly, but it's close enough to the parent agreement that they think that they'd consider it still fulfilling our obligations. And so they're trying to avoid that on their end.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is this where they're talking about the shift to possibly allocate 45,000 to Franklin County?
Correct. Yep. So Franklin requested 45,000. They said we can do additional work. We have the capacity. We've already met most of our obligations, and there's, you know, a little less than a year on the agreement. And they said that, you know, 45,000 would be how much they would need to support that additional work.
Okay, let me give you a little insight. This is what Franklin County wants to take the 45,000, and they're going to produce an app for that guide to assistance for agricultural producers that we've had in hardcover in the last couple of years. So that's the intention of what the 45,000 will be used for, and it will be done by the Franklin County district staff, but they're going to produce an app.
They have also proposed doing more farm visits, more workshops, more technical assistance. So they're pretty much an increase across the board. I think there's a lot of value that would come out of that $45,000. But that was outlined in that chart if you want to look at specifics. Any other questions about any of that before I dive in a little bit more into Lamoille?
So the Emily, Rick here, just the figures on the top half of this chart were what the districts ended up being funded to do.
Yeah, so that's their current agreement as they stand. Yep.
And then the bottom half of the chart shows kind of the original and the amended, if you will, whether it's an increase or a decrease.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
second half, some districts haven't proposed any changes, so they're the same. And then the
Mhm.
districts that have proposed changes, it's just the changes.
Yeah.
So,
I do want to clarify, I think, a little bit about, Richard, you brought up the guide, for agricultural assistance and the app that Franklin wants to produce. The way this agreement is structured, the $45,000 is primarily to support this additional 0.4 FTE for Franklin and achieve these additional deliverables here. Now, the way Ag CWIP is structured, if there are additional funds, Lauren has the flexibility to use that money towards additional deliverables, such as the guide. And that guide, we would absolutely fully support the app project because that has a benefit not just for Franklin, but for the entire state. So it's a project we support. The way it gets tied to Ag CWIP is a little bit more roundabout just because under our parent agreement, that guide specifically is not a deliverable. So that's sort of going above and beyond the parent agreement needs, whereas all of these metrics you have here do actually help us achieve meeting the goals of the parent agreement. So there are two things happening with Franklin, and I just want to be clear that these numbers here are sort of what will be reported under the parent agreement and help us meet our goals.
I kind of went overboard. That's one of our projects.
well, that's a helpful clarification, and yeah, there you'll often hear folks asking if a certain activity is allowable to fund under Ag CWIP, and we'll get the answer a lot from the agency. Well, technically that's not Ag CWIP, but if you meet all of your deliverables and you have remaining funds, you can use them how you see fit. So, yeah, any other questions, points of clarification?
Not at this time.
Okay, then I'm going to dive in a little bit to Lamoille and explain some of the situation there. And, Claire, feel free to jump in as well if you have anything to add. I do want to give a little context around what's going on there. So initially, this Lamoille's proposal was this was the proposal for their last amendment, their most recent amendment. So they had a smaller agreement and they proposed this amendment, which is where they're currently at. And the idea was that they would be doing primarily local working group and local funding pool work through that agreement. And it was going to fund a position that would Lamoille would be the fiscal sponsor for, but the position was intended to be shared initially between Franklin, Grand Isle, and Lamoille. A couple things happened with that. One, NRCS announced their reorganization, and Franklin and Grand Isle were no longer going to be, as far as NRCS goes, no longer working together. And so they considered still doing the position together, but decided ultimately it probably didn't make sense to be a shared position. At that time, Mary from the Agency of Agriculture and I had a meeting with Peter and from Lamoille to get a sense of if this was something that he wanted to take on for his district on their own. Grand Isle and Franklin felt that they had enough support through their agreements, so they weren't concerned about that. And Peter felt that they would still have enough work to do just through their district to support the agreement. So we moved forward with the agreement at that time. And one, he had difficulty with vacancies. They are now staffed up, so they actually have 2 agricultural staff at Lamoille, one of whom was an NRCS conservation planner. The other thing, in addition to the vacancy that happened, was that they intended to, as I said, have this this position support local funding pool work. And so they were able to do the meetings around the local funding pool, the stakeholder gathering, the analysis of data, but we were envisioning that after they were awarded a local funding pool, that this position would also provide technical assistance around that funding pool. It turns out, based on the needs of their community, that the funding pool is actually primarily forestry based instead of agricultural based. That was something we hadn't anticipated. And the agency said, you know, we'll support the whole engagement, the stakeholder engagement process, working with constituents to find out what they want from the fund pool. But if those practices themselves are not specifically agriculture, we can't support the conservation planning under this agreement. So ultimately, there were a couple of things that happened that were not entirely Lamoille's fault, that just had to do with how NRCS has changed, and then also the needs of the county not being sort of what they had anticipated for that body of work. We have had several meetings with them to try to adjust their deliverables without doing a budget amendment. And each time we've kind of come to an agreement sort of informally without doing an amendment process. They've had trouble, you know, getting to those goals, and talked about reducing it even more. So they are taking on some additional work around curriculum development, which is great. But even with that additional body of work, it's like maybe 300 hours at most. And they've reduced their farm visits, for example, by, I don't see the chart in front of me right now because it's a lot.
It looks like almost half. When they went from 150 to 60 visits.
Yeah. You know, unique farmers decreased as well. So, and the numbers were already low, we felt, for the size of the award. And the idea is that they might not be doing as many farm visits, but they'd be doing more in-depth conservation planning, but they're not doing that under this agreement now as well. So, you know, if you look at other districts who are doing around 60 farm visits, and remember, this is for a 4-year agreement, you know, they're like a quarter of the award, they're significantly less. And you can kind of look through and compare those, but that's kind of where we've left it at. We've given them a lot of opportunities to try to propose equitable work in other areas that they felt that they could do, so we wouldn't have to reduce. And we just feel like we've gotten to the point where a reduction is going to have to come into play in order to be fair to other districts who have received similar awards and are producing a lot more work. That said, we don't want to debilitate the district, especially when they now have finally two staff in place doing agricultural work. So, Michelle does believe that VACD could offer other work to make up for this reduction, doing direct NRCS farm bill support work, which would be, they could do some of that work toward the local funding pool, or support other NRCS needs, since NRCS is so under supported right now. And it would be allowable under a different agreement. Peter was sort of made aware of that pitch. But he is, as far as I know, he's still, he was hiking, I think, the Long Trail. So I believe he is still out of contact right now. So he kind of said, okay, let me think about it. And that's where we're at in terms of communication with Lamoille. So, we've been talking about this with Lamoille pretty much since that original amendment was made a year and a half ago. And so I don't think it's a surprise to them. I feel like we've given them a lot of opportunities to come up with something else. So that's kind of where we're at. Any questions about that? Claire, is there anything I'm missing that you want to add?
No, I think that's a good recap, but just to summarize, so the proposal on the table for the committee is to reduce the Lamoille award by $45,000. There would be a commensurate reduction in deliverables, and that the $45,000, we would have the ability to backfill for the district using other funding sources through VACD. And then that $45,000 that has been freed up would be awarded to Franklin to meet the proposed increased deliverables there. And by doing those two actions, we should be able to get to our overall numbers for the parent agreement. So that's the summary of what we're asking for the approval for today. And I guess there is one other aspect of this, but I'm going to save it for later because it's sort of tangential to the main request.
It makes sense to me. I just have a couple of questions that are not necessarily related to what we're deciding. But so I'm just curious: is the conservation planning that was originally targeted towards forest lands, is that still happening? And then, I guess the other question, I think you answered it already, Claire. It seems there are other potential funding sources other than Ag CWIP that may be able to fill in the deficit.
Yeah.
So I guess it's just the first question. It's just out of curiosity. I'm not sure it really matters in terms of our vote, but.
Yeah, that work should still be happening. As I understand it, it is still continuing forward. And that's part of, I think, what the challenge has been for Lamoille. In addition to having a vacancy for a long time, they do have that staff now, but one, they're trying to make up for a long agreement in a short amount of time. And two, their staff does have other things that they can work on. So they're not necessarily, that body of work still has to happen. They were planning on it happening under this agreement. And so if we don't do a reduction, then they're suddenly they're trying to make up additional work to meet that.
Okay, thanks for that.
So Peter's away. We make a
Correct.
decision today. He's going to come back from wherever he is. He's going to find out that he's got $45,000 less. Has there been any communication with the supervisor, the chair of the board?
There has not been direct communication with the board chair. There is I'm actually not blanking on who their board chair is right now. There is a supervisor who has been looped into a lot of the financial conversations. I think she might be their treasurer right now. So I'm not sure to what extent the full board is aware of this proposal. In fact, I don't think they are aware of it.
It's just a lot of money, and if Peter is still thinking about it, I guess that's his prerogative, but we've got to make a decision here. I understand sort of the, taking away 45 and adding 45 to somebody else. It's just, the shockwave of that, particularly for Lamoille, if we do have the ability to somehow bring in other funds to lessen the immediacy of the dramatic reduction, then we can explain that. I'm just a little nervous, but if all this is not new to Peter, if he's just kind of pushed it off so he can go for a walk, then we can make the decision accordingly, and then we can rely on staff to help him figure out how to continue his good work.
Yeah, I think we've had conversations with Peter multiple times over the past, as Emily said, this issue has been outstanding for about a year and a half. We've had multiple conversations with him. All districts had the opportunity to propose amendments and changes through our last solicitation that Emily put out. That's the information you're seeing here. So Peter's been very involved in this process. I don't think that this is going to come as a shock. And we do have other options to support his staff because we do have an interest in maintaining staffing levels at Lamoille. I would say also we're gearing up for another Ag CWIP proposal. We're gearing up for another NACDTA proposal. So in going forward, we can sort of reset and sort of right size agreements for Lamoille in the future. It's just getting them through the short time period between the current agreement and the next. So I think we can do that. The shift here is sort of, well, I think from my perspective, from council, we do need to meet the overall numbers for our parent agreement, or we risk an overall reduction in the amount that we get. That's a risk if we don't make this sort of additional award to Franklin to help backfill our metrics. Obviously Agency of Ag doesn't want to do that. They want to support us. So This is sort of our best shot, good faith way of doing that right now.
And I think just to call to attention a little bit more, there is going to be an RFA for this agreement coming out beginning of November. The agency has said that they want any amendments resolved by the end of this month because they want to, one, not have to be dealing with it while they're dealing with the RFA open, and two, they want to have an understanding of where the agreements have settled prior to considering more requests for money. And there's one season left on this agreement. Districts really, as a whole, need to know how to be planning, if their agreements are changing. So unfortunately, I just feel like there's not a lot of time to put off the decision and hear back from Peter and that's where we're at. We did also try to solicit some more information from him on where the budget is at, where his budget was at for this agreement, how much money had already been spent. Unfortunately, because of the way that the agreement is structured, it's, folks aren't being reimbursed for expenses. It's lump sum payments. And people don't, the tracking is often different. So he didn't really give us a clear answer. So, I feel like we have given a lot of opportunity to come to an agreement. I do want to acknowledge his ag staff has worked incredibly hard to come up with as much as they can. And really, like, they had a lot of conversations with me to put forward a proposal that they felt like was achievable. I didn't want to, at this point, I said I would rather you undercommit slightly and achieve more than end up short, because there's not going to be another time to change it. But they've sort of inherited this situation and and have put in a lot of work to try to make it doable. And so I don't want to cut them off at the knees, and I want to support that capacity, and I would love to just say, oh, just take the money anyway. But it really just doesn't feel fair to the other districts.
Yeah.
So
Okay. So if there aren't any other further comments or questions, thank you, Emily. I guess I would entertain a motion concerning reducing Lamoille's by 45,000 and increasing Franklin's agreement by 45 to do the revised work scope as outlined in the table in front of us.
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Motion by Kate, seconded by Bill to reduce Lamoille and increase Franklin accordingly by
I'm not gonna vote, I'm
$45,000.
gonna cruise myself.
Probably should.
Yeah.
Hey, Richard, we will note that you're recusing yourself in the minutes.
Okay.
Great. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Yeah, thanks, Emily. I don't know, it might be good just to reach out and let the supervisor, the chair, know that we've had this discussion. Peter is aware, so when Peter comes back, the chair can notify Peter that, they're looking at the reduction that we've enacted today. So,
sure, yeah, we can do that. And I think Michelle is figuring out, on our back end, how exactly we can backfill that, but she does feel confident that we can come up with something. So we'll let them know that as well and be in touch. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Emily. And before we move on, I just wanted to, there was something else I just wanted to note about this, the Lamoille proposal. So Lamoille, as a district, one of the things they do, they focus on a lot and do very well is outreach. They actually have someone who is a teacher on staff and does sort of curriculum and things like that. So this agreement, one of the ways they've proposed, maintaining or using these funds just to sort of get through the rest of the period is by helping to develop some curriculum for Envirothon. I wanted to talk about this because I think there's been a little bit of confusion or concern about this proposal. And Emily, please jump in and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing any of this. But the idea that Lamoille would use some amount of this funding, their AgSUIP funding, to work on Envirothon-related curriculum was a proposal that was made by Lamoille itself through this AgSUIP revision process that Emily led. There has been since some concern expressed by that. We supported it, just knowing that Lamoille has that capacity. We thought it was a good idea that they brought forward on their own. There has been some concern expressed because Lamoille is not the only district that's involved in Envirothon or in Envirothon sort of leadership. And there were some other districts, mostly White River, that was actually interested in maybe doing something along these lines themselves. This is sort of a weird and tricky area because we don't actually have funding through council that directly supports Envirothon. It's not like we have a pot of money that is set aside for Envirothon work. If we did, we would be putting out a request for proposals and sort of treating it like any of our other grants. And that opportunity would sort of be available for all districts. That's not really what happened here. What happened was Lamoille's in a tough spot. They don't want to reduce their funding. They need to have deliverables to show under this agreement. This was one easy way they could do it, and we thought it would benefit everyone if they did. I'm happy to talk more about that, but I think there was a specific concern that the Envirothon specific piece of this was sort of awarded in a non-competitive manner. And the reason why is because it's not a pot of funding that we have set aside for that would normally be treated in a competitive manner. It's just an idea Lamoille had. We said, great, we think you can run with that. But if there's concerns from the committee about how that was handled, I'm happy to talk about it. We are going to be, Michelle is probably better able to speak to Envirothon as a whole. But we do know that there's some various funding issues and programmatic issues to work through with Envirothon, but that's being handled on the VACD side of things. And if we do have money for Envirothon, that sort of gets put out competitively. I wanted to make you aware of that because that's sort of arisen since we distributed or I guess created this proposal. So if there's any questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that now.
I also just want to clarify part of the reason, in addition to the fit expertise wise in Lamoille, part of the reason why they proposed this specific body of work is because the agreement ends in June and only so much of that time is during field season, right? So they were specifically looking for things that they could do kind of in the off season to be able to make up for some of that work that the technical assistants are not providing in the field because they were so behind. So I just wanted to draw a little attention to that point as well, because they have the staff, they're hired up, and they were saying, well, we can only do so many visits with the time remaining just based on the timeline. They want to be doing other work, and this was a body of work that they felt they could achieve sort of in that off season. So
and I guess I apologize. Maybe I should have laid this out before the vote, but if people have concerns about this or questions, I'm happy to talk about this now while we're still in this portion of the agenda.
So you mentioned at the beginning of all this that there is a new parent agreement for Ag CWIP being developed, or Emily said request for proposals coming out in November. So is it your sense that Envirothon might be a portion of the new parent agreement?
Emily, I don't know if you have thoughts on that. I think that's maybe more of a Michelle question as
Okay.
well.
yeah, I can give from my perspective. I haven't been really involved in all the inner workings
Okay.
of Envirothon. From an Ag CWIP point of view, it is something that could be a fit. However, Envirothon is there are pieces of it that are more relevant to agricultural water quality than others, right? It's a more broad curriculum than just agriculture.
Correct.
We did ask the agency if they would support this type of work, and they said yes. And I think it's primarily because they also want to have Lamoille be doing work, and they sort of figured, if this is the best option of what we have at this time, then we'll
Okay.
support it. If I'm not sure how they would react to more than that in future agreements. I think that there are parts of it that are really relevant to this work, and there are other parts that aren't. And typically the way that agency has handled that is to say things that have an agricultural water quality tie-in are allowable under Ag CWIP. But once it starts to go beyond that, if you have retained earnings, you might be able to use it to support that, but it's not really a core part of your deliverables.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing, just for context for you guys to be aware of as we move into this RFA, the agency is anticipating a lot of competition around this upcoming RFA because the federal landscape is a little uncertain. They're thinking that more folks might be applying under this agreement than previously. People might be applying for more money, and they are anticipating further scrutiny in terms of the outcomes of Ag CWIP. So the idea of Ag CWIP is primarily, phosphorus loss reductions and reducing nutrient pollution through agricultural endeavors. They have been very loose in their interpretation of that in the past, and things that are pretty tangential they have allowed because they want to support the good work that districts and other folks who are funded under this agreement are doing. But we've been kind of clued in that they are looking for a little stricter view on tying to outcomes. That might not be directly phosphorus losses. That might be, referrals made to programs, things like that. But I think that there's going to be more scrutiny on how closely related our proposed deliverables are to agricultural water quality itself. So things that may have kind of flown in the past, I'm thinking probably won't for this upcoming round. So that's just to give you all a sense of kind of where the agency is at and what they're thinking about this. And I think that we can always put things in the proposal, and I don't have concerns about putting something in a proposal and then the agency deciding not to fund us at all. Because we know that they highly value the work that the districts do. So I think there is some amount of like, if we're not entirely sure, we can put something in the proposal and they can either say, yeah, we like this bit of it or not. But I don't anticipate that much of Envirathon would be funded in the future. If it is, I think it would have to be a very specific portion that's tied in directly to agriculture.
Yeah,
That's sort
it's
of
cleaner to keep it
my
out.
long answer.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the time. I realize we're a little behind schedule. I'm happy to talk about this more though. And I think I wanted to bring this issue up just so you're aware of it, because a lot of this process that we worked through to get to these numbers for Ag CWIP, it was not, every district had the opportunity to propose changes, to propose additional deliverables, to propose a request for a budget increase. We're working with the requests that we got from districts. White River, I do not believe, requested any additional money or changes to their metrics. What we're doing here right now is sort of responding to the information we got from districts to redistribute the $45,000. We did just vote on that and approve of that. If we need to revisit that in light of this information, I'm happy to do that, but just wanted to be clear that the Envirathon component of Lamoille's proposal specifically came as a result of something they proposed through a process all districts had access to, and is being made sort of to help everybody avoid a reduction in the overall agreement and keep Lamoille moving forward in terms of their staffing and their productivity under the agreement. So
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank the committee for the vote, and being with the shutdown. Fortunately, we have our own office and we only lost the use of a couple computers. So with these funds, we'll be able to put the product out there for you.
Good. That's good.
Very good. Okay, so I think the next, Jess, was there an update or that you wanted to share?
Morning, everybody.
And
Um, I apologize, I don't have the agenda up right in front of me, but Claire, I think this is probably about the NIFWIF agreement.
It's a quick update on NIFWIF. That's it. Yeah.
So like 30 seconds, really. We did receive a stop work order on the NIFWIF agreement because it receives funding through NRCS. So this really isn't going to affect us too much because we're pretty much finished with our deliverables under that agreement. We do have a portion of it subcontracted to WOV, Watersheds United Vermont. They have a little bit left to spend under the agreement too, but they don't have any plantings planned for that agreement this fall. So they're really just kind of engaged in stewardship of some of the sites that they've already funded under the agreement. So it's not going to affect them too much either. So just kind of an update on that award. It's I don't know. I get just kind of fortunate timing in a way that we were able to get this close to being done with it before this happened. So any questions about that? And I apologize, I didn't really sort of give the background of that agreement. We've talked about it before, but this is for Trees for Streams. This was the agreement that focused specifically on habitat plantings that support habitat creation and for eastern brook trout in particular. But it supports our Trees for Streams program.
I guess the good news is this is the only way we've been impacted by the current government shutdown directly. We have this one small pot of money under Trees for Streams that is not actively being used has a stop work order. We are hoping that will be short duration. So
Okay. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but fortunate timing, I guess, is what you said, Jess. So, fingers crossed. So this is the stop work order was a function of the shutdown, not all the other stuff that's going on down there.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So once the shutdown is concluded and it's resumption of business, then is it your sense that the stop work order would be lifted?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. But everything, feels pretty unpredictable with
Yeah.
the federal government right now. So, yeah. But even if our agreement just couldn't move any further at all, oh, well, yeah, that would be a problem. So hopefully, hopefully it does just kind of shift back into business as usual, and we can see it through.
Okay.
That's what I anticipate. We don't have any reason to think anything else would be true.
Okay. If anybody doesn't have any other questions, I guess any other grant updates? Hearing none, then moving along to administrative updates. Claire.
I do have a few more admin topics to talk through with you all. Just a reminder that under the budget that we approved at our last board meeting, the FY26 budget, I'm sorry, not the budget itself, the core services budget request to the Agency of Agriculture that we submitted and that was approved at the last board meeting and then submitted to the Agency of Agriculture. That included an increase, a budgeted increase of per diem from $50 per day to $100 per day. We are actively trying to increase per diem. There's a process that is outlined in statute that anyone who receives per diem as a state entity has to go through to request that increase. So we are actively working through that. I have submitted a form to the Agency of Agriculture Business Office outlining our specific request for council. So that would be a request that's being made in line with the budget request that was put forward. I should have I'm sorry, I should have emailed you that request document itself. I will follow up with that after the meeting. But basically, we just need to submit a form explaining why we're making the request to increase our per diem, and then that will be considered by the administration as part of the budget process. So that's been submitted. We will not hear whether or not that's been approved until we hear about the full budget that's being proposed by the administration. This is kind of an unfortunate process to have to work through, but we're giving it a go. The other thing that's come up with part of with this process is how districts fit into the per diem the structure as outlined in statute. Initially, I've been working with the Agency of Agriculture Business Office and the Agency of Administration to work through this process. Initially, the Agency of Administration requested per diem information from all districts. So I sent out a request for that information to all district managers. There was a very quick turnaround time on that information, and not everybody was able to get back to me in time for that to be included. Instead, AOA said that they could just move forward with what council submitted, and that we would sort of figure out districts later. So there's this sort of squishy area with how per diems are being considered under statute. The way it reads right now, the section of statute that outlines what districts can offer as per diem points to a section of statute that outlines per diem for the entire state. That section of statute got amended to put in place this request process for state entities. The problem is that districts aren't state entities, they're local government. And there's this question about whether or not they can or should be going through the state process to request increases. There's pros and cons to this, I think. On the one hand, statute gives us a clear path on how to request per diem increases. Without that, it's questionable about whether or not districts can unilaterally increase their per diems. The way our statute is written, what districts can offer as per diem points to the section of statute that outlines per diem. It used to be $50 per day as a set rate. That was very clear. Now $50 per day is a minimum. And so there's a question about whether or not districts can unilaterally go above the $50 per day minimum without engaging in the state process. However, the state process, again, is for state entities, and it's a little bit weird to have the executive branch have approval authority over local government budgets. So this is an issue. I'm just flagging that this is an issue that I'm going to have to work with AOA and the AG's office on. This is getting really in the weeds. This is more just an update for you all to be aware of what's happening. There is currently confusion, I think, among the districts about whether or not they can approve per diem increases unilaterally. I'm going to have to get a determination from the AG's office on that. I want districts to be able to increase per diem. But there's just all sorts of questions that AOA is throwing at us right now that I just don't have answers to. So just as a heads up, that's that's going to be coming down the pipe probably, maybe not by our next board meeting, but probably the board meeting after, as an issue to talk about. But are there any questions about this right now?
Yeah, Claire, sounds ugly. I'm sorry for, no good deed goes unpunished, and this is definitely what you're dealing with. So, I think all of us, either on the call or involved with the Conservation District community, appreciate your work on this. It's a small but nonetheless important piece of trying to retain supervisors, attract new, younger supervisors. And I wish it wasn't such a difficult question. It seems pretty clear that for supervisory union reps doing work for council as a state agency, there's a different path for per diem, right?
Yes. So
Versus,
council's request can move forward.
yeah,
That's not a question. It's
Okay.
very clear for council.
but it's different for districts. So, I don't know. I, if there's anything that those of us on the committee can do, or those of us involved with council as supervisory union reps or alternates can do, just to further get the word out to these agencies, that it seems that each one of them are pointing fingers at a different agency and not making your job any easier. So,
Well, I'm happy to try to work through it. And at the end of the day, worst case scenario, I think we end up with maybe a recommendation on how to change our statute. If it's this complicated, this unclear, if we want districts to be able to unilaterally be able to approve per diem rates as a part of their local government budget process, we can probably recommend that be put in statute. So I'm just sort of keeping that in the back of my mind, but I'll let you know how things go as I work through AOA and the AG's office on this.
okay.
I
Thank you.
do have, are there any other questions on that? Well, I'm happy to move forward and talk about the procurement waiver. This is something I'd like a vote on, although ultimately I think it needs to go to the board for approval. So this is also something I've been working with the Agency of Administration on, and I'm going to share my screen. This is, okay, that's not, okay. Can you see this bulletin 3.5 contracting waiver plan?
Yeah.
Okay. So this has been a process that started with our last board meeting, and the instruction to take our procurement plan to the AG's office. The AG's office said, well, if you're a state agency, you're subject to state agency guidance. AOA, the Agency of Administration, initially said, well, actually, we think you're a little different. Maybe you're not subject to it. Then they reversed their position after further legal consultation. And now Agency of Administration is saying that council is subject to all state guidance on contracting and grant making. So what we have here is a waiver plan. The Agency of Administration is not looking to make life hard for us, basically. They want to work within the rules to, while also acknowledging council's unique position and unique structure. So what they've recommended doing is and what the AG's office has recommended doing is filling out this waiver plan. This is a standard plan that all agencies can do to sort of highlight how the standard guidance doesn't apply to them or request a variance on the guidance. So I've tried to, I met with AOA to go through Bulletin 3.5 sort of minutely and talk about what doesn't work for us. And so these are the specific sections we've identified and some specific modifications. I do want to talk about this with you because it relates to how we make contracts. The one contract we do every single year is our personnel contract. The other, well, I should say there's two. There's the personnel contract, which is currently with VACD, and there's the district manager rep contracts that go out to support two district managers and serving as the role of the rep. It's through an election process. They get elected to that position. So that's all. There's some specific ways we're doing things now that are not in alignment with state rules, but I think there's compelling reason to maintain what we're doing now. So the first thing to note is that council does not have what's known as a appointing authority in statute. Normally, this is the secretary of the agency. We don't have a secretary. We have a board chair. So this is just saying for the purposes of 3.5, the board chair is the appointing authority. So that I think is pretty clear cut and sort of not, hopefully not very controversial. The second, I think the bigger, more substantive variances are these next few, which have to do with sole source contracting. The way I've phrased our request right now is that council seeks to maintain an option to secure essential personnel services, aka employee-like personnel services, via sole source contract. This is how we're currently treating it. So the way we do our personnel staffing, so my position, Emily's, Jess's, every year, we just say, VACD is uniquely situated to provide these services. And we do a contract with them to secure what would otherwise be state employee positions. Now, normally under a contract situation, these would have to go out to bid. We're not doing that currently. There's an argument to say that we should be doing that, but really, when you look at the guidance that's given by Agency of Administration, there's a whole subsection of contracts that are specifically for employee-like services. This is completely unusual. Like in the private sector, this is basically not allowed because you normally have employees and then you have contractors, and there's a very clear line between them. The IRS regulates what goes where. But in state government, there is this sort of third way of employee-like personal services. So these are contracts that are being used to fill state government positions, basically. There's specific guidance around that from AOA, and mostly it's just to ensure that the contractors themselves, when they're secured by the state through contract, that the state agency is still responsible for ensuring that things like workers' comp and required insurances are secured for those employees, either by the agency itself or through other means. Right now, we have those insurances. They're being supplied by VACD. So this is all to say this is allowable. It's unusual, but we're trying to align with that specific guidance of state that the state is giving. What I've requested is that we have the option to maintain securing personnel through a sole source contract. So this would be a non-competitive process, would not go out to bid necessarily unless the board wanted it to go out to bid. And that we could do that up to $200,000 per contract. Now, this is less than our current personnel contract, but what AOA has recommended is that we separate out every position from council and do that as a separate contract. It's a little bit more burdensome, but I don't really see an issue with that if we need to go that route and if it's cleaner. So I would leave it to the board about whether or not we want to sole source or put these positions out to bid. From my perspective, because these roles are very much like employee roles, and because council otherwise is a board that is subject to changing membership, there is a compelling reason for council to, in some cases, do a sole source contract to secure stability of staffing over time. So rather than changing out positions every year or even every 5 years, that there is some continuity and institutional memory that's developed within council. I think that's a compelling reason. But again, I think this needs to be reviewed and approved by the board. I'm obviously a little biased because I am an employee secured under this contract. So keep that in mind. We are referring to our existing staffing. There is a alternate view and this has happened in the past, that districts could fill some of these roles, that district staffing could. We can always explore that. What I have here as the language does not lock us in to treating our personnel staffing as sole source contract. It just maintains the option to do that by the board. So this can be a board decision that gets made on an annual basis, honestly, as the contracts come up. So that's the biggest thing here. I have the same request for variance for the district manager rep position. It's hard to see how that could be a competitive bid because we have an outlined elections procedure. So this is just requesting that council has the ability to support the existing election procedure that we've all agreed to. So I don't think that's as controversial, and that supports district managers directly. I have a separate request for the flexibility in the duration of the personal services contracts. AOA actually usually recommends a 5-year contract. We've been doing 1-year contracts because we just don't have the budget certainty to lock in 5 years at a time. So this is sort of a request about timing. Sometimes we have to make our personnel contracts retroactive. So this year we approved the personnel contract after the start of the fiscal year, but it was effective as of the start of the fiscal year. So it's requesting that we maintain the ability to do that, just given the fact of, how we operate and our budget uncertainty year to year. And this would be to avoid a lapse in essential functions. Okay, the rest of these are sort of pro forma. I don't think they're substantive, but essentially there's a lot of sections in the bulletin that relate to specific state procedures, like their accounting system called Vision. We can't do that because we don't have access to it. So this is just saying we're seeking to substitute our own financial procedures and systems wherever those are mentioned in the bulletin. Same thing, anytime the bulletin refers to employees, it's understood that this is not a state employee that's being talked about. It's our contracted personnel. That's just sort of language cleanup. And we also don't have the ability to post bids publicly on the state systems. So we would have to have an alternate route of posting bids. It would probably be our website, as well as other public locations available to us. So that's a lot to throw at you all at once. I think, again, the most substantive part of this is the personnel contracting, the way we're handling that. But I'm happy to just talk through any of this, answer questions, hear concerns.
Yeah, I'm really confused about the sole source because I'm not sure which direction is it going. I mean, I kind of have an understanding of what in my past life about sole source contracting and why you do it, but it's not clear to me exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, so council, in securing the personnel services from VACD, has been treating that as a sole source contract. So we've been.
You mean money going from VACD to council?
No, from
The
council.
other way around.
VACD.
Okay, that
Yes.
was my question. Okay.
That's it. Yep.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the way we're currently doing this is that council, we have a personnel agreement with VACD to staff our standard positions, the administrator positions, the grant manager positions, et cetera. We kind of just keep rolling that forward year to year. And there's
Without going out to bid.
Right.
Without going out to bid. And there's a lot of reasons for this. One is that VACD itself has a very similar mission, very similar skill set. very similar, obviously constituents. So there's this, idea that they're uniquely situated to provide services, these types of personnel services. This is also just what we've been doing, and I think there's a compelling argument to be made about the continuity of staffing over time. So this is, again, we've just been sort of taking the contract with VACD and redoing it every year. It gets approved by the board, presented to the board, approved by the board every year. We don't put it out to bid. So under state guidance.
Let me just, so part of the justification for them being uniquely situated is because they, tell me if I'm not seeing this correctly, is because they offer these services to all the districts, right? I mean, as opposed to, I mean, I think you know that our district has made arguments about whether or not that money would come directly to districts and bypassing VACD.
Yeah.
So I'm just anyway, so that's the way I visualize it is VACD provides services to everybody, to all the districts in the state, right? I mean, I don't know.
Yes. So, and I sort of list out some of the reasons here in this language. I think that's one of them, is the fact that we avoid potential conflicts of interest. When you have one, like in the past, the administrator position was held by district managers. It was held by, before me, it was Carrie O'Brien at Caledonia. Before her, it was Nancy McGuire at Rutland. So there's precedent for districts holding these positions. There is a potential complication of the fact that one of council's main duties is to distribute money to districts and to, performance manage those grants to districts. That can be a little bit more complicated when you have the recipient of a grant also being the manager, like managing the grant parent agreement or making determinations, helping make determinations about distributions of funds. There are potential conflicts of interest that can arise in those situations. VACD does have the mission of serving all districts, the same as council. So they're similarly situated in terms of the scope of their mission, as well as potentially having less direct conflict of interest when it comes to the grants management side of things. That said, this is something I think the board should discuss because obviously, there's a lot of complication and interplay between what the interests are. And so, the other part of it, as I mentioned before, I think compelling reasons for staffing through VACD are, the fact that VACD itself as an institution is a part of the National Conservation Planning Partnership, as is council. So there's this sort of pre-existing familiarity with the national frameworks and connection to national frameworks. There's also just familiarity generally with the NRCS system, whereas an outside entity, some other type of contractor would not have. So those two things, districts would also have, are similarly situated with regard to those. But the final point is, I think, just the continuity of operations. One of my big concerns would be if we put this out to bid every year and we were changing grant managers every year. When we do that, we found this has happened in the past, when we lose a grants manager, it takes months to get that person up to speed again. And so we really face delays on getting money out to districts, getting grants out to districts as somebody new comes up to speed on how things are done. So I think that's one of the more compelling reasons to continue our current operations. The language in this document, though, maintains the option of council to put these out to bid. So that can be changed at any point in time. The language of this document here doesn't change that. So it doesn't lock us into sole source contracting. It's just, we need to have this conversation, I think.
Right.
I think the sole source makes sense. I mean, I totally agree that there isn't any other organization that could. I think the question is that our district has raised more is what is the role of the ACD? And that's a completely different question. But anyway, thanks for that clarification there.
Yeah, I mean, Kate, it may also, that's a very good question to ask, but maybe not specific to the personnel structure that
Yeah.
this personnel contract is intended to focus on.
I agree.
And
yeah.
so, just as a way to try to, identify all the things that are on the table for going sole source or not, I think this personnel situation and the DM representatives, lend themselves for all the things that Claire was mentioning: consistency, timing, familiarity. So, I would love to have that broader discussion about where districts might benefit before the ACD.
Yes. I've gone through this exact same argument with the administration in my past life about sole source. So I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Claire, I see the little asterisk there for this box that we're looking at. So, and what is the asterisk was, all contracts other than are intended to remain. Okay, very good.
yeah, that's just a clarifying
Okay.
language. There are just really these two exceptions I think we need to deal with. In all other cases, if we were contracting something, it would be put out to bid. Normally, like this almost never happens, but it could happen in the future. Like we might secure a human resource specialist or a financial management specialist for services to districts, in which case we would put that out to bid, or we might, I'm trying to think of other types of services. Anything else I think could be done through a bid process, really. So that's just to clarify.
Yeah, if we ever get to the point of having, a heated election season where all districts and all ballots and petitions were, contested, maybe we would need to or maybe we would need to put out to bid some sort of election security type process. But, I think we're light years away from that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I've reviewed the bid process with AOA. I think we can meet the requirements of it in terms of, required notice and all of that. So it's really just these specific, there's no overarching concern with our ability to do bids. It's just specific situations that maybe don't fit as well.
Yeah.
And at least we do have a open hiring process for these positions with open interviews.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. VACD advertises these positions broadly when they're being hired for. And, that many of you have been a part of that process, but I guess the one thing I would say, I realize this is sort of being said on the record, but I do think that council staffing should ideally be done by state employees. There are all sorts of issues we're running into, the fact that we don't have state employees. That said, the Attorney General's office and AOA are both aware of our current staffing, how it's being done. So I really just sort of put it in their court to tell us if we're doing something wrong at this point. So just so I know I say that to try to, make you a little bit more comfortable, because this has been brought up before. People are like, man, are we doing something wrong? They're aware. This is not unprecedented within state government, is my understanding. So we're just trying to dot our I's and cross our T's with this document.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason that we got here when it comes to state employees. So.
Okay.
So Claire, are we at the point now? I think you said that you would love the finance committee to take a vote on this so that we could present it to the full council.
I think maybe, I don't even know if it has to be a vote, because ultimately I think the ability to approve this would fall with the full board. But I would welcome a vote. I would also welcome an informal recommendation from the committee, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with taking a motion and a vote to forward this contracting waiver plan on to council for their review and approval before it gets sent on to the Secretary of Administration. So just so that folks at council know that we've talked about this, you know, Claire, you should prepare yourself to run through everything you just did for council again, so that they can all hear this, including the agency representatives. So if
I'll move this recommendation.
I'll second.
Motion by Richard, seconded by Bill to approve the contracting waiver plan as presented by Claire.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any further discussion? Yeah, Claire, I would just like to extend our appreciation for all the work you've done on this with folks at the Agency of Administration to make sure that we are doing things properly and we are in compliance to the best of our ability. So it sounds like you're definitely making a name for yourself over there with folks. And, you know, so I do sense this is moving in the right direction on this piece of it anyway. So thank you. Hearing no other comments or questions, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All right.
Aye. Very good. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, everyone. I do feel more comfortable having all of this written down for what it's worth for council. So, all right, I will let you know how things go with this approval. You know, if I hear anything back from AOA that changes anything, and I'll let you know, and we'll discuss it at the next board meeting.
Okay.
So the next item is a very quick update on the Vermont Emergency Management. So this is, we've been sort of thrown into the world of emergency management tangentially a couple times over the past years, primarily due to the historic flooding we've seen and now the historic drought. And so we've been working a lot more with the Vermont Emergency Management directly, just to make sure that we're looped in on information, guidance from them about what should be happening on the ground. I've signed up to be on their information distribution list. There's, I guess, in the background, some sort of question about, you know, whether or not council should be more formally represented within the state's emergency management operations. This would be purely to receive information from their emergency, their State Emergency Operations Center when it's activated, and to potentially be invited to meetings that they have to distribute information. That's sort of the extent of it, but just to let you know that there's this sort of connection that we could have in the background between council as a state entity and Vermont Emergency Management to sort of formalize that. Right now, we're just sort of trying to keep in the loop as we can. We are actively participating in the Vermont Drought Task Force. Jess has been representing us on that effort. I sort of fill in as needed. So we are trying to keep in the loop. The biggest benefit I've seen from this is that we can more directly get guidance to districts about what should be happening with landowners. The agencies put out guidance, but it doesn't always reach people. And so the districts, because they're talking with landowners all the time about a variety of issues, are pretty uniquely situated to just say, like, you know what, there's a drought. If you report it, it helps us as a state to be able to access federal resources. Like, that's it. But that message doesn't always get out to people. So, you know, that's just an update on sort of a line of development between council and emergency management. And we can talk more about the drought specifically later in the agenda if we have time. But yeah, just wanted to give you that update.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so that connection, Claire, you mentioned VEM and Agency of Ag, but I would gather Vermont ANR is part of that. network as well too, right?
Yep. So anytime there's an emergency in Vermont, VEM activates their emergency operations center, and sitting agents, and there are agencies that have a seat at the table at that, including ANR and the Agency of Agriculture. Others include like transportation and buildings and general services, that people like that. But so we are not, wholly disconnected, because those agencies are obviously on our board, and we do get information from both those agencies. The problem I think we've run into in the past is that the communications can be slow, they can be incomplete, they don't always necessarily get where they need to be. And I think the benefit of getting information more directly from agency or from VEM is just that we can get that information to the districts without it getting lost somewhere in the phone chain of information being passed down the line. So.
Yeah, I think this is a great idea, overdue idea, and certainly one that the districts, for the right circumstances can try to do, a better job, more complete job at notifying affected landowners.
Yep.
So,
Makes sense to me.
so Claire, there's if you're done with VEM update, the next item is the drought.
I can go over this quickly. I see we're nearing the end of our time. So if we need to cut off for any reason, there's no more voting items, but I'm happy to continue. Just to give a brief update, we are in the middle of a historic drought. We have been looped into the Vermont Drought Task Force. The main guidance from that task force right now has been to try to get more reporting of on-the-ground conditions, because those reports are what drive the determination of the drought severity. So the National Weather Service actually looks at anecdotal evidence as part of their determination of how bad the drought is. So we have districts that have been going around doing various, ways of trying to get more reporting from farmers and other landowners. That's all we're doing right now. And then there are, specific drought related resources that are going to come online, hopefully. Right now, the federal resources, I believe, are still tied up in the shutdown. But there has been a request from Vermont to have federal resources leveraged for made available to Vermont farmers. So when that happens, obviously we'll get information to districts. Districts can push those out to their constituents. That's where we're at. But the impacts have been pretty sobering, I think. Just reports of historic number of streams going dry, historically low record, recording on a number of rivers and streams. Jess, do you have anything more to add on this?
I don't really. I think it's been a good I think it's been a good place for us to be, and I think that it's been really clear the valuable role that it's a great place to kind of make it clear to everybody else what role the districts have to play in a situation like this. And it's a really like practical, I mean, it's been interesting to sort of been on some of these early calls where folks that we don't necessarily always interact with, people from Leahy's office or Welch's office, kind of asking about how they can, where they can refer their constituents to when they're calling to get help with reporting, for example. And so it's, it's like the districts have this very clear and practical role that they can play. And it's nice to be in a place where you can sort of reinforce that with all of these other partners and highlight this function that the districts play really well.
Yep. Everybody get out and do your rain dances before the ground freezes.
I know. I've been reading every little drizzle with just great appreciation. We don't have more to, I think, update the committee on that. We'll, if it doesn't impact our financial situation directly because we don't have any grants that are impacted by the drought or anything like that. There is some thought that we might try to secure funding for drought work, particularly like outreach or things like that, reporting assistance, but that might happen through VACD rather than council. So we don't have anything specifically finance related on this, just a general update. And then I can do a quick update on the government shutdown. So our only direct impact is, like we mentioned, is the NIFWIF grant through Trees for Streams. Council remains unaffected. We have mostly state grants through our budget. That said, VACD is heavily impacted. A lot of the positions that work in NRCS offices are not able to do that work right now. And moreover, there's been a stop work order on a lot of VACD grants. So that's a challenging situation that we have been helping out with here and there, but unfortunately mostly falls to Michelle at this time as the VACD executive director. So that's happening. We've also heard some impacts from districts that are similarly facing a stop work order. Right now, what we can do from council side of things most immediately is simply pay invoices on a timely basis and really try to keep cash flow for districts going. So Bill, I know you've helped out with a couple ACH payments recently. We're probably going to be doing those more frequently for the near future just to get people money while federal funds are tied up. So right now, I think from the situations I'm aware of, districts should be okay temporarily as long as we can keep cash flowing. If the shutdown goes longer, a month or more, we might start facing situations where districts are really more heavily impacted in terms of their ability to make payroll and keep staffing on. We might have to have a bigger conversation at our next committee meeting about council's ability to extend funds to float districts directly. That's not our first go-to. Obviously, paying invoices is our first go-to. Districts themselves often have access to lines of credit. That would be their second go-to. If there's somebody in a really tough position, we might consider case by case helping out, but we don't have procedures for that. So it would be something to talk about with the committee. I don't think the situation's that dire yet, but just a flag for the horizon. And then VACD is also going to be looking at this about what can be done to help districts in the short term during the shutdown a little bit more directly, just using VACD finances. So happening on both sides of the house, these conversations. And other than that, the impacts we're hearing from districts have been around lack of access to computers and office space, including I'm running into issues where districts can't confirm certain financial information because they don't have access to those records. They're locked up in a building somewhere. And other districts are saying that they can't get their mail. So this is having a real impact. And I think in the future, there's a thought that districts continue to move further away from the federal system, at the least getting PO boxes and their own computers. Maybe also the office space conversation gets renewed. So that's a longer term goal. And I think ultimately a lot of that would come down to our core services agreement in terms of how to support districts meet those needs. But again, that's for the future. Any questions?
Suggestion, back
Yeah.
when you were talking about drought reporting, would it be a good idea to suggest to, like my district, to touch base with all the dairies and ask, how's your water situation? Then report back?
Yeah. I think it's helpful to touch base with them and to make them aware of how to report impacts. And if they need help reporting impacts, to help them with that. That really is the need right now. And yes, I know Agency of Agriculture is interested in like infrastructure impacts, like if wells are going dry, if people no longer have the ability to do solid waste management the way they once did, if they're getting, just unexpected impacts like an electric fence doesn't work anymore because there's no conductivity in the soil. Like there's just random impacts that are being seen, and that's helpful for them to know. So yes, I would say if you have the ability to do outreach like that, that would be
Well,
great.
I could suggest it to our district people to
Yeah.
touch base and see how the dairies are doing, the farms are doing,
Yeah.
and then report back.
Yeah.
Because now we have farms with 5,000, 10,000 animals.
Yeah.
Oh.
I know your area is so heavily into that I think any additional information that can be gathered is helpful for the Agency of Agriculture and for the centralized reporting for the federal declarations.
Mhm.
Lauren should have that information. So
Yeah, okay. Because there's one dairy we have that's got 100,000 gallon holding tank that while things are quiet during the night, it keeps filling. They got about 40 wells.
Mm,
That's how much water
yeah,
5,000 cows and almost as many heifers.
yeah,
A lot of water.
yeah,
We can't use Lake Carmike because they put alum in it.
yeah.
1975 drought, we were pulling water out of Lake Carmike.
Mhm. Yeah.
well, the Vermont Emergency Management has put out guidance that in extreme necessity, people can go and get water in buckets from rivers and streams and roadside springs. I mean, that's an extreme scenario, but they did put out guidance about that as long as you're not using it for drinking water. So
Right.
it's the impacts are pretty bad right now.
Yeah.
So
Going back to the shutdown business, we are gonna have to get a post office box because we cannot get our mail. And we do still get some checks in the mail. So I
Yeah.
just want to double check that it's all right for us to do that because the
Yes.
post office box will not be in the same town as our office.
that's fine. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's totally fine for you to have a post office box in addition to your physical location. The only thing to consider is when you're using what address for what type of form
Yeah.
you're filling out. So
Yeah, I know we have to have the physical address for things.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we're not going to get in trouble with the post office box in a different town.
no, that's fine.
Because we're in a double whammy here in Springfield. Our main post office is closed. The ceiling in the workroom collapsed.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they're closed indefinitely until they figure out how to fix it.
Yeah, you
We have
should
a
be able to get a post office box wherever you need one or is convenient. So
Or we can
We have
find
a
one.
unique situation in Highgate. We even have Canadians that have post office boxes in the States.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because they have camps in the States.
All right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Just wondered if anybody saw the email yesterday from NRCS with an update. And according to their article yesterday, 96% of the NRCS staff are now furloughed. 67% of the Farm Service Agency are furloughed. Going on further, EPA, 89% of their staff are furloughed, and Department of Interior has 82% furloughed.
Hmm.
That's not good. I've never seen anything like that before. And I came from a state where we used to not get paycheck quite frequently. As a matter of fact, this year Pennsylvania still does not have a budget.
wow.
Although luckily back 15 years or so ago, they passed a law saying the state employees must be paid whether you have a budget or not. So,
yeah, I think the federal employee impacts are maybe even more drastic in terms of how we're able to do our work than the funding freezes or the stop work orders. One concern that we have is obviously how does money get to landowners? Particularly a big concern about practice verification. So that our VACD staff was going to do a lot of practice verification while the government was shut down so that farmers could at least get paid for things like cover crop. We can't do that now unless we leverage state funding, which I think Agency of Agriculture is going to let us do that in some roundabout way. But yeah, that's a big potential impact directly to constituents, to landowners. And I don't know that there's a good way to do that other than if district staff have the ability to do practice verification and have funding that can support them in that is not frozen to potentially do that. But it's a bad situation.
Yeah, it is.
The longest that I remember, of course, my daughter works for the agency and runs the office in St. Albans, was 18 or 19 days.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, that wasn't that long ago either.
No,
No.
4 or 5 years ago, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
All right. Well, it's approaching 10:15. I know folks have a full calendar of other things in front of them. So, Claire, was there anything else on the federal shutdown?
No.
All right. Looking at the agenda, I was given an opportunity to go to Fort Worth, Texas. Next week, I'll be attending the National Association of State Conservation Agencies. At that meeting, I'll be talking about the conservation districts and funding, our ongoing challenge to find sufficient funding for districts as part of the state sharing session. So when I return, hopefully flight traffic controllers will allow me to get down there and get back. But I can report out at our next Finance Committee meeting on November 19th, 8:30 a.m. That, of course, follows the next council meeting on November 13th at 1 p.m. So unless there's any other business, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Claire, I did want to acknowledge Claire had a heavy hand in helping me prepare for the presentation. So Claire, thank you for all the information and the PowerPoint, which is of great assistance.
Of course. Yeah, no, I hope we get good information about funding strategies from other states. I know they always share that information at this meeting. So
yeah,
if you can get the latest copy, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, I can call for adjournment then.
I'll second.
Motion by Richard to adjourn, seconded by Bill. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Right?
Thank you all for coming.
Yep. Have a good day, everyone.